Chapter 2 of Sunday Nights at 7, The Jack Benny Story, by Jack Benny and his daughter, Joan. I have always been romantic about women. For many years, I thought they were almost a higher species than men, and put them on a pedestal. All my life, there have been women I admired at a distance, in a sort of heroine worship, and there have been other women I have respectfully adored in personal friendships. The women I worshipped, usually from afar, so afar that they never knew it, were tall, statuesque, and talented, like Nora Bayes. In 1927, when she was 47 and I was 33, Nora Bayes was making a comeback as the headliner of a bill at Keith's in Washington, D.C. Even in middle age, she was a stunning woman with a dynamic personality. She just hypnotized an audience. She was a great song stylist with a soft contralto voice. Some of her songs were romantic ballads, and some were comedy songs. She was magical on stage, casting an unbelievable spell on her audience. She never stood still. In perpetual motion, she crossed, turned, smiled, swung her hips, and did a recitative in the middle of a song. She had been one of vaudeville's top-ranking stars since 1908 with her husband-partner, Jack Norworth. They wrote Shine On Harvest Moon and featured it in their act. Modesty was not one of Nora's virtues. Originally, the act was billed Nora Bayes, assisted and admired by Jack Norworth. Norworth had a habit of assisting and admiring other girls besides his wife, but he assisted and admired the other girls in their bedrooms. So she divorced him in 1913 and did a single. Then her billing was Nora Bayes, the greatest single woman singing comedienne in the world. People thought she was Irish. She looked Irish and had an Irish lilt in her voice. She was really Jewish, and her real name was Leonora Goldberg. She was a crazy, temperamental person who had 4 or 5 husbands, and I don't know how many lovers. On tour, she traveled in her own private railroad car. In hotels, she sometimes booked a whole floor to accommodate herself, her piano accompanist, George Gershwin for a time early in his career, her retinue of servants, and her relatives, friends, and sycophants. She fought with her managers and agents, broke contracts, and was wildly extravagant. She didn't have a cent in the world in 1927. She was still as beautiful and as talented as ever, but her erratic behavior scared managers, and she hadn't worked in years. However, I found her a wonderful human being, and was deeply thrilled to be on the same bill with the actress I had looked up to as the ideal of a vaudeville performer since I'd broken into show business as an adolescent. Except for Jack Norworth, I was the only performer ever permitted to work with her. She liked a little piece of business that I was doing with Willie Burns, George's younger brother, and asked if I wanted to do a bit with her. I suggested that after she closed her act, we could do what was known as an afterpiece. She loved the idea. I can't tell you how thrilled I was, me doing a bit with the great Nora Bayes. She had a sofa in her act on which she sat to sing some of her songs. After she took her bows, I entered through the opening in the curtain. My hat was on. I was holding my overcoat. The audience stopped cheering. I was just getting ready to go home, but you said you wanted to see me about something, Miss Bayes. Yes, I did. You know that story that Mr. Burns was telling, and you didn't let him finish it? Well, it wasn't a nice story. Come sit next to me, she said. I did. I'd love to hear the end of that story. Oh, I can't tell it to you, Miss Bayes. Oh, please, she coaxed, wriggling her torso in a most suggestive way. Well, if I told it to you, you'd slap my face. The audience would hate it. It's a terrible story. But don't be silly. Tell the story. We're all sophisticated. I'm sure it can't be that bad. It's worse, I said, but I was weakening. I slithered closer to her. Whisper it in my ear, she said seductively. I did. moving closer and closer, almost getting on top of her as she giggled and laughed. I was practically making love to her as the curtain came down. The audience went crazy. Nora Bayes was the first of my heroines. They were women with that indefinable quality of class, that certain something that sets them apart from the whole human race. They are superior human animals in the way that a musician like Pablo Casals is a superior human animal. Such women have a distinctive manner of dressing and moving. Their minds are sharp. Their conversation is interesting. Their emotions run deep. Florence Vidor, whom I met once at a dinner at the home of the silent movie director, Thomas Inks, was such a person. So were Kay Francis, Irene Dunn, Ingrid Bergman, Anne Sheridan, Lynn Fontaine, Ruth Gordon, and Helen Hayes. All women are rare and wonderful, but this kind of woman is more. Talent is part of their charm, though these women never permit their talents and ambitions to freeze up their warm femininity. Lucille Ball, one of the most gifted comedians I've ever known, has beauty, and with it talent, brains, and drive. Yet she brims over with emotional fire. I have had relationships with these women, and many others, that have been purely platonic. My wife has known I admired them and enjoyed their company. Let me tell you that a man who sees a woman only as an object to quench his sexual thirst has missed out on one of the most inspiring experiences in life. Mind you, I am not arguing that pleasure in bed with somebody you love is not good. I am saying that there is also a pleasure in being with a woman whose company is fun because she is an interesting human being. The fact that she is also a member of the opposite sex gives her those grace notes that make her song more pleasing to hear. I am not an extrovert. Even as a young man, I could never be aggressive with a girl. In fact, the more a girl excited me, the more tongue-tied I became. I was clumsy at amorous byplay. I wasn't good at that kind of casual teasing and bantering to which girls respond and which leads to infatuation with a guy, often a guy who breaks their hearts. I never had the courage to make an overture to a girl unless I was sure she would accept me. I would begin to sweat and stammer. I didn't know what to say or what to do. If it wouldn't have looked so ridiculous, I'd have taken my fiddle along when I went courting, so I could clutch it for security, just as I did when I told jokes in the theater. Greer Garson was one of those platonic secret loves of mine. I had met Miss Garson several times at dinner parties. She was as refined and gracious a lady in a living room as she was playing Mrs. Miniver or Elizabeth Bennet on the screen. Now one morning, about 8:30, I was taking a walk in Beverly Hills. I love walking. I still walk 2 miles a day. In Beverly Hills, walking is not done. People drive. Walking arouses suspicion in Beverly Hills. The police driving in prowl cars have orders to stop and interrogate any person walking. He must explain why he is walking. It's assumed if you are walking, you are not only up to no good, but are probably a master criminal. However, by now the Beverly Hills police force knows my idiosyncrasies, and I'm not questioned when I'm walking. Well, as I was walking down Roxbury Drive, I saw Greer Garson. She was driving a long white convertible with the top down. Her hair was streaming in the breeze. A blue scarf was around her neck. She was a vision of loveliness. She saw me and stopped the car. "Hello, Jack," she said. "Oh, hello, Greer," I said, my heart beating faster. She smiled. "It's a nice, that is, a fine, day," I said. "Isn't it, though?" "Yes, it is," I said. She smiled again. If only I'd had my violin, I could have played something. Finally, she said, "By the way, we're having some people over to the house this Saturday, and if you and Mary are free, Buddy and I would love to have you join us." "Well, I'd sure love to, and I'm sure Mary will feel the same way," I said. In order to get her address, I had to cross the street to where she'd stopped her car. I started across. As I did so, I stepped in the only mound of horse manure seen on Roxbury Drive in 50 years. I slipped. I fell flat on my face. I picked myself up. I felt terrible. I walked over to the car. To my amazement, Miss Garson was positive I had slipped on purpose, as it was just the sort of thing that could only happen to the radio character of Jack Benny, schnook extraordinary. "You're so funny," she said. "You're delicious. You've made my whole day. I wish I could learn to fall the way you did. It must have taken you years to learn how to fall so as not to hurt yourself." "Well, I didn't do it on purpose, Greer," I protested, "and besides, I did hurt myself." "You have such an adorable sense of humor," she said. She never did believe me. In 1920, I was in the throes of a romance with Layla Hyams, a lovely blonde. She was the daughter of John Hyams and Layla McIntyre. Hyams and McIntyre were stars of vaudeville and musical comedy. Their daughter followed in their footsteps. She was a bright, clever, interesting woman. We were attracted to each other and kept company for a year. I could listen to her talk for hours. We vaguely discussed the possibility of matrimony. We postponed it. She was an ambitious girl. She wanted to be an actress more than she wanted to be a wife. We broke up when she went to Hollywood and became a movie star. Some men meet the right girl early in life, know it right away, and get married once and for all. Some men never find the right girl. Others have to go through several romances until they experience the real thing. That's the way it was with me. And when you come to the real thing, you know it, especially after you've had the other kind of romance, which looks like love and feels like love, but isn't. It's more like infatuation, but an infatuation that lasts for a long time. Before I found the real love of my life, I had another serious romance with a girl called Mary Kelly. She was tall and had golden blonde hair. Her face was beautiful. Her voice was low and quavered with a kind of delight in everything. She was a talented performer. She played in a big-time vaudeville act, Swift and Kelly. She played the dumb girl. She came from Chicago, and her family was devoutly Roman Catholic. One of her brothers was a priest. I knew her family, and they were wonderful people. She, too, was an ardent Catholic. We didn't think we would get serious when we started going out. I met Mary through Gracie Allen. Mary shared an apartment with Gracie and another actress, Raina Arnold. Gracie wasn't married to George Burns yet, though she'd recently become his partner in a vaudeville act. Burns and I had been friends for several years. One evening, Burns and Allen broke in a new act at a small theater in Newark. Burns asked me to watch the show and give him my opinion. He and Gracie were as nervous as any vaudeville actors were when they tried out new material before an audience. Besides me, they had invited Mary Kelly, Raina Arnold, and Miss Arnold's escort. The new act was sensational. George asked us all to supper, his treat. During supper, Mary Kelly looked over at me. I looked into her eyes. Our glances joined. We felt a kind of magnetism pulling us. I began seeing her all the time and dropped every other girl. From being stuck on each other, we went on to become crazy about each other. We decided life was unbearable unless we could be with each other constantly. Like George and Gracie, they were now married. We also would get married, like George and Gracie. We would start a new vaudeville act, Benny and Kelly, just like George and Gracie. Looking backwards from the vantage of wisdom, I can see we weren't at all in love. We were infatuated with each other. It was George and Gracie who were in love. We caught their emotion, which was so strong it was contagious. You can catch love by picking up love microbes from being around a man and a woman who are in love. That's what Mary and I caught, a disease, a bad case of love. I'd like to interrupt Daddy here to let George Burns say a little about my father's love life. Quote, "In the early days, Jack was a terrific ladies' man. He went around with all the girls. He played on the Orpheum circuit and slept with every girl from coast to coast. He and Phil Baker were two of the handsomest guys in show business. As they followed each other from town to town, they would leave notes with names and phone numbers, until he met Mary Kelly. That was serious. Jack liked married women, but he was very secretive about it. He really was silly. We were staying in a suite of rooms at a hotel, and his current lady had a room very nearby. Every evening he said to me, his best pal, "I think I'll go make her laugh for a few minutes." I said, "Make her laugh for me, too." Mary Kelly and I were in trouble from the start because of our religious differences. Mary oscillated from one extreme to the other. At one moment she was convinced she couldn't live unless we were married. I would say, "Let's do it right now. Let's go to Waukegan, meet my father, and begin planning our married life." Then, likely as not, she'd fly into a temper. She'd say we could never marry. We were of different faiths. She could never marry a person of my faith. The whole situation was impossible. We had to break it off. We must never see each other again. And she was so dramatic, so convincing. I'd believe her, and we'd break it off. Once, after being on tour for several months, during which time we'd written each other love letters almost daily, I got off the train in New York. I couldn't wait to kiss her again. She was standing at the gate. Her face was angry. She looked like she'd been crying. "What's the matter?" "I can't marry you, Jack." "We don't have to get married," I said. "Everything is over between us," she said. "I can't stand this torture any longer. We have to forget each other." We sat down on a bench in Penn Station and talked it over, heart to heart. She showed me why we had to break it up. I promised to put her out of my mind. I would never call her again. I would never write her another letter. We were finished. 2 days later, the phone rang. "I miss you so much, honey," her velvet voice said. "I gotta see you just once more, then we'll break it off forever." So we started all over on the merry-go-round of frustration. I guess maybe she liked tormenting herself and me. Each time we broke up, I'd be heartbroken. I'd go on the road. I wouldn't write to her. Then there would come a telegram from her. "Can't we be friends? The least you can do is write to me." I'd write to her. She'd write to me. I came back. We were in love again. Then, sooner or later, she'd say, "What's the use, Jack? We can't go on like this. We've got to end it. Let's call the whole thing off." So we called it off. If I tried to act distant, or even tried to be just a friend, she didn't like that either. Once we had a date. I had just come in from a long tour and was too tired to go out. I called room service. We planned to have a dinner in my room. We gave our orders to the waiter. While waiting for the food, we got into a nasty argument. Either I had written to her while away, which was wrong, or I had not written to her, which was equally wrong. One word led to another. By the time the room service waiter wheeled in the wagon, she was nearly in hysterics. The waiter, ignoring us, calmly laid the table and put out the food. He acted as if it was the most natural thing in the world at the Forest Hotel for two people to be shouting at each other while dinner was being served. I signed the check. He wished us a hearty appetite. We sat down, still arguing. I had lost my appetite, but she was the kind of person that trouble and worry make hungrier. There she was, sobbing and crying, tears running down her face, while devouring a bowl of mushroom soup, a filet mignon with hashed browned potatoes, a dish of ice cream, and a pot of coffee. Seeing the absurdity of this, I began to laugh. She got more upset by my reaction. I laughed harder. She was now keening and wailing. I was rolling around on the floor laughing. She couldn't forgive this. And I think this cured me of Mary Kelly. I went to Europe for 3 months to get her out of my system. She met me when I came back. I couldn't believe my eyes. "Why didn't you write to me?" she asked. She was pouting. She looked enchanting. "Write you? I thought you hated me, remember?" "You could have written me a letter, just one letter." "We're not in love anymore. Why should I write you letters?" "You could have at least sent me a postcard," she said. She was smiling. She put her arm in my arm. I know it's crazy, but our romance started all over. But now I was worried all the time. I was waiting for the fireworks to begin. I never knew what would make her flare up. Now, she said, we had to get married. Neither her family nor her religion was as important as our relationship. I said we'd better wait. She couldn't wait. While playing in St. Louis, I got this wire from her. If you want me, I will come and marry you tomorrow. I need you. I love you. I am desperate. Mary. I read the telegram a dozen times. I wore out the carpet in my hotel room. Then I made up my mind. If we got married, our life together would be a hell on earth. I couldn't ruin her life as well as mine. I telephoned her and said that we must forget each other. She married another man. She was as unhappy in marriage as she had been unhappy before. She began eating more and drinking heavily. For about 10 years, I didn't see her. In 1934, when my radio popularity brought a demand for personal appearances, I was booked on a stage show tour. I took along my orchestra and several acts. I had an idea for a sketch that would satirize girl singing trios like the Boswell sisters. I told agents I was looking for girls who sang badly. One had to be very fat, one had to be thin and short, and a third had to be homely as sin. In the sketch, they would pretend they were real sisters. They would be rotten singers who thought they were marvelous. I would tell the audience that I was always on the lookout for new talent, and I was going to audition a young singing trio. The moment these three ridiculous-looking girls came out, I figured the audience would laugh. One day, Mary Kelly came to the radio studio. She asked for a job. I didn't recognize her. Her eyes were still sweet, but her hair was unkempt, her voice had cracked and become harsh, and her body, once so lovely, was now fat and shapeless. I was touched by the spectacle and didn't know what to say when she asked me to give her the job of the fat girl in the trio. I didn't want to do it. She pleaded with me. "How can I do this to you, Mary?" I asked. "We've been sweethearts. Once we cared for each other. How can I go out and make fun of you now? I can't do it. Please don't ask me. I can't." But she begged me. "What's past is past," she said. "I gotta have the job, Jack. I'm down on my luck. I need the money." She got the job. She was sensational. She still knew how to get laughs. She mugged and sang out of tune and shook her fat body like she was one mound of jelly. How the audience laughed. I didn't. I cried. They couldn't see me crying because I wore a smile on my face. I'm supposed to be a comedian. They paid their money to laugh. Mary Kelly was sure earning her salary. I was crying inside. I was crying for Mary Kelly and for myself and for all the bad things that can happen to nice people in life. I was lucky. I had found a new love not long after the breakup with Mary Kelly, and this time it was the real thing. All the romance that had happened before seemed like shadows on the wall in comparison. That ends Chapter 2. Thank you for listening. Please like and comment and all those internet things. Thank you.